I'm Stephanie Wilson, and you're listening to Freedom Over Fascism.
It is basically my thing to have hope responsibly. And I say that because I think that, especially as a member of Gen Z, I'm 24 years old, so I consider myself a member of Gen Z. And there is a lot of disillusionment and lack of hope among my generation. But the thing is, it isn't imagined. That I think the first step is acknowledging it as totally valid because things are terrifying lately for so many different issues. And
hmm
so, in gun violence prevention in particular, something that I always find myself thinking about is, like I said, having hope responsibly. And what I mean by that is making sure that what I am asking of people to put their energy into and what I am asking of people to imagine for the future for themselves is something that is founded by facts and by history as something that is possible.
Hi, friends. Welcome back. If you're like me, every day is tough, with difficult news coming in from every single direction. That's why I always talk about hope being an action verb, because we don't have any control over the entire situation around us, and we can't change our political and social reality everywhere all at once. As my husband says, we can't boil the ocean. What we can do is contribute everywhere we reasonably can and use our action to sustain our hope, not the other way around. We can't wait for the courts or Congress or those polls we should be ignoring to give us hope that we'll defeat fascism. What we can do is our bit locally, to come together in a community, either here or somewhere else, and use that action as a way to sustain our belief that our future is worth working for. We'll never save freedom and democracy if we curl up in defeat because everything seems so dire. I talked to Abby Kisicki, a Gen Z organizer for gun violence prevention, about why she got involved in the gun violence prevention movement, how she thinks about using hope responsibly, and what kind of future she imagines and works for in trying to change gun laws and motivate people in her area to take action. Abby lives in Chicago and works at a university and gives her free time to organize forums where people can take action on gun violence prevention laws. She's a graduate of ARENA's training for organizers, which you can hear more about if you go back and listen to my interview with Lauren Baer in episode 47. So hang in there, friends. We're in this fight for the long haul, and we've got to have the long game in mind, which means that we work where we'll be most effective, we talk to people outside our bubble, and we become the means by which people in our area understand the truth of the world we live in. We know the legacy media won't do it. In episode 48, I talked to Tara McGowan, founder and publisher of Courier Newsroom. I urge you to follow them on social media because they use short-form, video-first reporting to talk about what's going on. Those are the short pieces you can forward on or just take your cue from when you're thinking about how to talk about reality. Also, friends, please consider upgrading your subscription to paid at www.freedomoverfascism.us. If only a few of you upgrade, I'll be able to produce more content as we get closer and closer to November. And please enjoy my conversation with Abby. Abby Kisicki, welcome to Freedom Over Fascism.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie.
I'm really interested in talking to you about what you do at the Newtown Action Alliance and, what brought you to this place. Do you mind introducing yourself to our listeners and then we could talk about what it is that you do and how you do it?
Absolutely. Yes. Hi. So I'm Abby. I am the Community Engagement Associate for Newtown Action Alliance. Newtown Action Alliance is a national grassroots advocacy organization working to end gun violence. So we work with on the federal level primarily, but also sometimes the state level to pass federal level gun violence prevention legislation. We have relationships with federal offices, in Congress to get legislation passed. So what I do in particular is run the evening lobby session calls, so the after hours lobby sessions. And what those are weekly evening Zoom calls open to advocates and volunteers across the country. We get together every Monday night, and first there's a toolkit where we share information about what's going on the federal level and state levels with certain bills, the movement on them, maybe rallies or media campaigns that are going on with different pieces of legislation in this movement. Then we move on to making calls. And so we make calls to federal DC offices of members of Congress, urging them to take action on certain pieces of gun violence prevention legislation, like the bill to repeal PLCAA, the Protect Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. So we want that repealed. The assault weapons ban we advocate for. We advocate for Ethan's Law, which is child access prevention of accessing firearms. So lots of great legislation we push for. So it's been about a year and a half since I've started hosting these events. And I started this because in July of 2022, I was at my hometown's 4th of July parade. And so I'm from Highland Park, Illinois. And I was there at the shooting that happened at our parade. And to cope with that, first, what I did is I took a month to kind of process it with my family. I was there with my parents and everything. And we just kind of, you know, did our thing for about a month. And of course, we were continuing to take care of ourselves. But then I went, I want to start paying attention to other gun violence prevention organizations in order to cope, to do what I can to honor the memory of people who should still be here and the people who shouldn't be dealing with this trauma every day, especially those who have been physically harmed, but also for everyone else who's been impacted by this and other acts of gun violence. And so what I did was I learned about through other Instagram accounts for gun violence prevention. I learned about Newtown Action Alliance, and they posted information about these lunch and lobby sessions. And they were exactly what I described, Zoom lobby sessions during the day, during 2 hours during people's normal lunchtime. And I joined one. I absolutely loved it. That's when I first met Angela Weber. She's the host of those events and the director of community engagement for Newtown Action Alliance. I said, is there an evening version of these? Because I work during the day. So I'm a staff member for Northwestern. That's my full-time job. And then I say, and by night, I work for Newtown Action Alliance as a community engagement associate. She said, no, but you can start one. We would love that. And so an email chain began and that got started. And it's my way of coping with what happened. And it becomes that for other people who join those calls. So
That's really amazing, but also interesting in a couple different ways. On this podcast, we've been thinking about how the vast army of activists and volunteers out there can make a difference in federal or state or local. And these kinds of Zooms are really prevalent to get people from all over the country to be engaged in causes that they care about. So you're doing this. Simon Rosenberg does his calls about what's the best action to take. Anat Shankar Osorio does this movement briefing once a month to talk about messaging. So this idea that we can all come together from all over the country using Zoom and then multiply our force is one of the most important things for overall cause activism, but also elections, so that we can get people elected who will change or make better laws. So I think this is really great that you are doing this and making it available to people in the evening. And I'm also really intrigued by the idea of you doing this action in order to cope. A lot of times on this podcast, we talk about how hope is an action and that I do this because otherwise I would be in a nervous breakdown, crying in the corner, not getting out of bed. So, what are your thoughts on how people can use action to help them cope with the situation that they're in?
it is basically my thing to have hope responsibly. And I say that because I think that, especially as a member of Gen Z, I'm 24 years old, so I consider myself a member of Gen Z. And there is a lot of disillusionment and lack of hope among my generation. But the thing is, it isn't imagined. There is an element of it that I think the first step is acknowledging it as totally valid because things are terrifying lately for so many different issues. And
Hmm.
so, in gun violence prevention in particular, something that I always find myself thinking about is, like I said, having hope responsibly. And what I mean by that is making sure that what I am asking of people to put their energy into and what I am asking of people to imagine for the future for themselves is something that is founded by facts and by history as something that is possible. And I would not host these, and the people that I work with wouldn't be doing what they do either if they didn't have hope. A couple things give me hope in particular. First of all, we collaborate with other organizations, of course, with Newtown Action Alliance, and particularly through our lunch and lobby sessions, which now are just lobby sessions because there's a morning and evening version. And so we have several partner organizations, one of which is Activate America. They do postcarding, and they reached out to us and they said, listen, we are for the 2024 elections. We are seeing that one of the issues that is most important to people is gun violence. And so we would like to work with you to create messaging for these postcards for the 2024 elections for key races that we have voter lists for. And first of all, that gave me hope and the people I work with hope because it is confirming in like a basically like democratic strategist, like data analysis point of view that what we are seeing in like a Fox News poll, even for example, about people's interest in solving gun violence as an issue and gun control, even people's favor of gun control, that what we are seeing is true, and that what we are feeling from people as they join these sessions and what they're talking about as they talk about what they talk about with their friends, about the fears, their founded fears of gun violence that they feel every day. And their experiences from, say, losing a loved one or having, tended to gunshot wounds in a mass shoot. Like people are feeling this themselves, obviously. And then when the data backs up and comes in and confirms it, especially when it's confirmed by other organizations coming to us, that feels so good. And it's like an inkling of, oh my gosh, what could this look like if we continue to build this? And so that's one thing. And I feel amazing saying there's another thing that gives me massive hope. So Newtown Action Alliance has been around since 2012 when the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting happened. And so, of course, it is rooted in Newtown, Connecticut. And so many of the leaders from this organization started in this movement after that shooting happened. And something that happens as well is for mass shooting survivors who are survivors of acts that are more maybe like white supremacist motivated or domestic terror motivated. I feel like, especially for white survivors, what can happen, and survivors from like wealthier backgrounds, what can happen is you experience gun violence and then you get involved to take action and you are brought into a world of, oh my gosh, this is just X small percent of what is out there and what people are affected by, especially in communities of color, low income communities, urban communities. And you start kind of thinking about it in a different way. And so Newtown Action Alliance is like that too. They have a history of the Sandy Hook Elementary tragedy happened. And then they started working with other advocates in Connecticut, a lot of whom were from cities like Hartford, which already experienced gun violence really, really close to home and were very impacted by it. And there's this kind of reckoning that happens of the kind of leveling of, look, you know, we have different experiences. We've been dealing with this for different amounts of time. The kind of knitting that collaboration together and getting it to work by making sure that the collaboration is the right, like that you have the right intentions, that you're doing it right. I say, especially from the Newtown Action Alliance point of view source, that you're listening to and genuinely taking the lead from communities most impacted is important. And so I wanted to talk about that basis first before I talk about anything else. Here is what gives me massive hope. Newtown Action Alliance has been in this movement for now 12 years. They have been, in particular, spearheading the assault weapons ban for 12 years. Since those 12 years, what people who have been here since the founding say is, I never could have imagined Chuck Schumer putting the assault weapons ban, Ethan's Law, and universal background checks on the floor for a unanimous consent vote, for example, that happened in December of 2023. And we are thrilled about it. We are very happy about that. And what happens in this movement is, and I really understand it, people get so disillusioned because Congress doesn't have the votes. Of course, right now the House is Republican and the Senate is barely blue. And of course, the White House is blue. And for the record, with gun violence prevention in particular, the White House absolutely rocks. They have been amazing. One of the main reasons I am so energized for the 2024 elections and electing not just blue, but Biden is because of keeping the Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the White House. But people get disillusioned, I feel like, in my generation and in general, because you can't pass a lot of gun control legislation because of how stonewalled it gets by Republicans. And what happens, though, is there's incremental movement forward on even just like staffers and senators to Newtown Action Alliance emails and calls and meetings in DC level. There are things going on behind the scenes and ways that people are inching forward on this with co-sponsorship, with strategies to, like Chuck Schumer did, put bills on the floor that are happening that are not meaningless, that genuinely give us hope. And we're like, we are so much, and this isn't even me, this is people who've been in this movement for years saying, this never could have happened when we started Newtown Action Alliance after the Sandy Hook shooting and when we were lobbying for this in 2013. So that gives me hope. And what my goal is bringing people in and being able to tell them truthfully that, first of all, your hopelessness is not just understandable and so valid, but it is also causing your inaction, which feels like the right choice because you feel helpless because things are so depressing right now. But it also is, that is exactly what the gun industry want. They want us to feel like it's impossible, and not just impossible, but unethical and unconstitutional to push forward gun control legislation. And what I say is, do not let them dictate what you are doing. This is making a difference. I am showing it to you in this toolkit. I am showing it to you in these actions that have happened, these co-sponsorships that have been gained, the strategy that we worked with Dems on in Congress to push this forward inch by inch. It is happening. Do not let the gun industry dictate your hope on this. So, founded hope, practical hope is extremely powerful, and it's what keeps me going.
That's really inspiring. And Simon Rosenberg, he is an older Democratic strategist pollster, and he holds these weekly Zooms called Hopium, which he calls Hope with a Plan. And he is getting activists from all over the country together on these massive Zoom calls. And what that says to me and what you're saying to me and about my own experience is that we have to make the connection between what's going on and our own actions. And what we have to do is confront that internalized voter suppression, which says nothing I do will make a difference. Nothing, not even voting. I'm just sitting here helpless. These bigger forces are at work, and I'm just going to sit here, maybe watch MSNBC all the time, maybe not, and just go about my life. But really, the connection between this situation and hope and action is really crucial. And having you as a Gen Zer out there working so hard on this particular issue, I mean, there's lots of different issues, but this one is yours, uh, will also inspire people your age and will give them permission structure, leadership, a vision of what activism or at least voting can do. And the fact that you recognize that this chain, you have to look at it by inch, as opposed to, are we going to change everything overnight?
Yep.
And that's what we find in the States, is that states that are super red, people don't want to invest in because they think, oh, that's never going to change. But really, you have to start. You have to start somewhere and you have to keep at it, even if it's going to take a decade, right? Because if you don't take action, that decade is still going to happen, but you won't have made any progress. So I salute you, and I want to ask, how well do you feel like you're reaching people your age? What do you see among people you work with? You work at Northwestern. I worked at the university level for a really long time. Do you see any change in behavior among people your age and a little bit younger, based on what's going on in the world, or maybe what you're doing and can talk about, or maybe other people's experience? What do you see that like trajectory as being?
I'm lucky enough to be advisor for a like staff advisor for a student group at Northwestern that works for gun violence prevention. And what I see is a lot of engagement over social media, which I think overall is fantastic. People drag social media engagement way too much. Instagram is very powerful. TikTok is especially powerful. And activists and young activists are using it to not just talk about these issues, but to galvanize young people. And it's working. If we're looking at just gun violence prevention as a unique issue, which of course is not realistic, but we do as issue organizers, because that's the way we have to work sometimes, is for gun violence prevention alone, we really want Biden elected. We endorsed him a long time ago. The White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, like I said, is so crucial, in particular to states, actually. Their collaboration with states is they convene state leaders to talk about their progress on different elements of legislation and issues within this movement and let them learn from each other. They have a bunch of calls about strategy going forward, and they release resources on safe storage, and they're just fantastic. And what's important to recognize is, yes, Gen Z can feel hopeless, but that doesn't mean that they completely disengage. They feel hopeless because they know so much, is what I would say, is because they're observing so much, especially through a phone. What I worry about, I guess, is this feeling that people get, I guess, across generations, of people being like, I don't want to just be told to vote this way because X. Like, you want to give them a reason, my friend was saying, to vote for a candidate instead of, you have to do this.
So you're a part of Gen Z, and you've gotten involved in this activism based on an experience in your life. I would love to ask you about what training you've had to be able to get into a real advocacy organization.
So I'll start by saying that the initial training I had, I wouldn't call training as much as kind of more and more engagement with volunteering for campaigns that kind of prepared me to take the next official training steps. And what I mean by that is, so I have a twin sister, and when we were about 15 years old, she was an intern for the Democratic organization for our congressional district. And she had urged me for months during her internship. She was like, Abby, you got a phone bank for our Democratic candidate for the seat. It's a really, really tight race. Within the X few numbers of votes campaign, the seat kept switching and between Democrat and Republican. And she was like, it's a little nerve wracking, but I would really recommend you doing it. And I did it. And that was my first kind of barrier lowering into getting more and more comfortable with organizing. And then my sister pressured me in college I was in Wisconsin for college. She was like, such an important state for the midterms. Abby, I really think that you should get involved with College Dems there. They probably have all sorts of great phone banking and text banking events. And they did. And I got involved. I got my friends involved. And the rest has been easier and easier because of the nudging from my sister. So that's the first thing I'll say is that having that close family member be really passionate and constantly chip away at my hesitation was really important. So that's my initial training, is like life training. In terms of formal training, I have done the organizer track of Arena Academy 101. And that I learned about through the daytime lobby session host for Newtown Action Alliance. And she did the Arena 101 organizer track. And she said, Abby, I really think that you should do this. It'll teach you really practical skills about organizing. And I was like, absolutely. And I did it. And what was so cool about it was that it's a lot of Democratic Party organizers, but then there are also issue organizers there in a way that is kind of taking more and more precedence. It's like they're having more and more issue organizers join the training. What was so great about it was that it gave me the perspective of how do you look at what you're doing from the perspective of a campaign, of running a campaign, even if you're an issue organizer. And so the training is in electoral politics and running an electoral campaign. But the volunteer engagement that you learn is still the same for any campaign. How do you relate to people in a way that will get them on board, but not make them feel like they're just being used for a cause or they're just followers? These things come up so naturally in federal and state contexts, in even just the issue organizing, the gun violence prevention organizing. And so learning those practical skills was really cool. And it was especially cool now as we approach the 2024 elections. I realized that it was really helpful to see the process of running a Democratic campaign from that electoral politics perspective, what they consider, not just from the organizing perspective and looking at the whole of the congressional district, but the fundraising perspective, the campaign manager perspective, all of those different parts of the team, how they come together to make something work. And I think about, okay, based on this process that I know, how do I, as an issue organizer, how do I use my knowledge of this process to make the issue I'm working with especially heard by the people I'm trying to get heard by?
Well, I think the way that you have taken what you learned and applied it to what you're doing is really important. The episode I did with Jeremy Smith of Civitech can also bring in an element that I don't know if it gets enough traction, which is the actual data. And most campaigns don't know that they can find much better data for their races. And there's a lot of people in technology companies who are trying to make that possible at a low price point. So the fact that you had messaging training and organizational training and fundraising and all of that, I think will just make you more and more prepared as you keep going. And I really want to thank you for coming on today and talking with us. Thank you for listening to Freedom Over Fascism. Please leave a rating or review wherever you listen. And if you can, please subscribe at www.freedomoverfascism.us.